I came to the sport of soccer because my family loved it. But the difference is that I've been able to create something that's very unique and very original, that goes outside of what traditional philosophy recommends or dictates.
Legends is synonymous with going for it. I think as a coach, I'm always asking my players to take players on and go for it. And that's different. Like, other coaches don't ask their center back to take players on and try to create after breaking down the forwards off the dribble. And to be frank, I think that's what not only makes us different, but makes us better.
Legends means to me embracing uncertainty. It means expanding my comfort zone, not knowing how something is going to turn out. Figuring it out and then doing it again and again and again.
So Legends to me is a place where you can go and where a child can be growing their own self-concept of who they are. You're put in an environment every single day when you're doing the one-on-ones and the two-on-twos where you're set up to have success and you're set up to have failure. And at the end of it, you're going to know that you're coming out doing your best, being competitive, and figuring out exactly who and what you're made of.
Legends teaches you a lot of things on the field, but it's the things that they teach you off the field that most athletes are going to take away more than they're going to take away what they've learned on the field. You can teach somebody to do some crazy things with their feet, but teaching them to be brave and try those things is something that's going to translate off the field as well.
So when I think of Andy and I think of the Legends, I cannot think of them separately. He helps create legendary players. And that philosophy is ingrained in everything that I do, and a lot of people that have graduated from the club do.
I look at things differently because I grew up in a boarding house in Oxford, England. And many of the lodgers that would come and stay with us came from all over the world. You know, every continent, every race, every color, every religion, every creed. And every day we ate breakfast and dinner together. And large arguments ensued about religion, politics, the situations of the day. And so I had to think out of the box as a kid, because I was witnessing and eventually participating in arguments with people with a wide diversity of perspectives. And that changed the way that I thought about the world. And it was an opportunity that most kids would never have.
I have never met anyone, or very few people in my life have I met, as passionate and dedicated as he is. He does not care necessarily who he disrupts. Innovators do that. They disrupt the norm. And a lot of people, and most people in the world, don't like that. And if we did not have people like that, we would not have the creativeness, the ingenuity, the innovations that we have in the world today.
Yeah, I think for me, I actually learned more from Andy as a coach, coaching alongside him in the club over the last 10 years than I did as a player. Andy, even now, pushes us outside of our comfort zone, like demands that we look at our coaching structure differently and put two coaches together on every team within the club, or that the entire club practices exclusively indoor, which is so different to other clubs anywhere that I'm aware of. And that innovation and that demand for doing things differently has put the club in really unique places that gives our kids underneath us opportunities that maybe they wouldn't have if Andy wasn't so fanatical about innovation and trying things and looking at things differently.
As a kid, I was, as Anson Dorrance likes to say, I was marinated in the sport of soccer. And my uncle played in the Serie A and was one of the first Englishmen to do so. The whole family loved the game of soccer, and they worshipped the more creative players. My dad used to talk about Stanley Matthews, Puskas, loved Pelé, George Best. But in addition to that, I was brought up in the Charles Hughes system of, stick it in the mixer, long ball, and at best, working with a lot of space in cones and grids, where players weren't expected to be truly amazingly creative.
Having worked with Andy for a long time, and heard him talk about his family's history in the game and the connection that he made during his early years coaching, it always struck me as interesting how much he worshipped Maradona and George Best and just the really creative players of the old days, and how that was counter to his time as a player. Playing the way you face, long ball first, everything safe. When in doubt, kick it out. It always struck me that difference for him, given his background and that dichotomy.
Until 1987, I was a traditional coach. I focused on team tactics and winning. I focused on functionally training my players to be a right fullback, a left winger, a very specific positional role, instead of promoting ultimate creativity so that any player could be an incredible individual. Until in 1987, I worked with Anson Dorrance at the USA Under-19 national team camp with teams from all 4 USYSA regions. And Anson at that camp pointed out to me when we were selecting, me and the other coaches that were there that were selecting the team, that we had selected 10 players that were dribblers and goal scorers, or either goal scorers or dribblers. And Anson, in doing so, showed me a new perspective that changed my whole soccer life.
As a player and now a coach for the club, I've heard the Anson Dorrance story probably around 100 times. The one thing that repeatedly sticks in my mind in regards to the story is that even at the national team level, how important it is for coaches to identify the best dribblers and goal scorers.
I think for Andy, it was a recognition that regardless of who you think the best player ever might be, whether it be Pele or Maradona or Messi or Ronaldo or Ronaldinho or Brazilian Ronaldo, all of those players are incredible dribblers and goal scorers.
It just goes to show that even a coach like Pep Guardiola that values possession still recognizes the need for a player that can break down the defense.
I'm a possession guy, I'm a connector, but at the same time, watching video, I still use a lot of those same skills that I was taught at the Legends facility. We play teams like Notre Dame, Akron, Stanford, teams that collapse on you really fast. So there's a lot of times I'm stuck between 2 guys in the midfield. I'm in some tight space and need to get out, and all it takes is a pull play behind the leg or a step over or whatever, and I'm out of there.
So 2 years after Anson shocked me into realizing that I'd wasted a huge chunk of my first 13 years in coaching, I started the Legends Club. It didn't take long before my teams started to become much more competitive on the score sheet.
Yeah, so when we started, it was really tough because we hadn't mastered these skills, and so people were laughing at us. But then to come back just like the next season and have these skills mastered, and not just mastered, but like they were doing what they were supposed to do. Like we were winning and we were scoring goals and we were playing beautifully. And yeah, that was really cool.
Maybe 2 years, 3 years of persevering with this dribbling and shooting approach allowed my players, no matter what position they were playing in during the game, to get into the attack. And people would drop in and cover them as they went forward, even if they were a right fullback or a sweeper. And it made us very dangerous because we could get a player coming out of the back that could join into the attack and do things just like our center striker, because we trained everybody to be, for example, like a Roberto Carlos from the great Brazilian team, or even today a Marcelo, who gets forward on a regular basis and creates and scores great goals. So all of our players became this versatile player that wasn't only good on the dirty side of the ball, defending, but also very, very good at creating things on the other side of the ball. In Matthew Syed's book, Black Box Thinking, he points out that as pressure is turned up, perception narrows. It becomes restricted.
So within the Legends Club, we have 3 distinct phases that we lead the kids through. The first being the technical learning stage, where we make sure that the kids have the technique of skill and ball striking down perfectly. That leads into our one-on-one stage, which we kind of call the skill application stage, where the kids are learning how and which moves to use in certain places. Leading into our tactical stage of 2-on-2, where now the kids learn to incorporate a teammate both on the offensive and defensive side into the skill base.
At Legends, when we learned the skills, we learned them in a very slow and methodical way. Coach Andy would stand up in front of us and he would have us all spread apart and stretch our arms apart as far as we could and make sure we weren't touching anybody so we had plenty of space to do the skills. But he would actually break them down step by step, and for each step of each skill we would go over it for 10, 15 minutes and just drill it into our brains so that when we did move on to the next step, that first step would be flawless.
One of the things we have done and I worked on from when I was a kid with the Legends and Andy, and even today as a coach, we coach our kids to do this, is the one-on-one battles that we have at practice. And you ask any kid over time, they will tell you, gosh, we do this so much, 95% of the time of our practice. Why do we do it so much? It's tiring. It's gruesome. You're going at somebody, you're playing defense, you're playing offense, you're using your skill, you're creating opportunities, you're shooting, all these things. What's interesting about that is when it's all said and done, you ask the players, they're sweaty, it's tiring, they'd love to do it again. And it's because in those battles, it's an individually fought opportunity. And every moment during that round of one-on-one, you have an opportunity to win or to gain an advantage. And in life, that's what it's full of. Is every opportunity you have an opportunity to win and to get better. Does the score at the end of the day matter? No, not so much. But are you starting to fight for something each and every moment of the day?
During all those 1v1s, he'd make us think about multiple things as opposed to just scoring and defending. It was, which way are you forcing the defender? Are you being creative at the right times? Are you taking the shot when you have it? How hard you're willing to work when you have the ball, and then how hard you're willing to work to get it back if you do make a mistake and lose it.
So the competitive environment that's surrounded with one-on-ones and two-on-twos goes beyond just the accountability and the winning and the losing. I remember so vividly playing and Andy yelling to us how within that competitive culture, how tired you are, these 2-minute rounds, you're giving everything you got, and him yelling, fatigue will make you a coward. And it's because it's when you're tired that you don't want to be creative. You don't want to be skillful. You don't want to get back and make that run. You want to dive in just to get the ball. And that competitiveness that is surrounded in that environment for those two minutes are the most grueling and the hardest thing that you'll do. But when it's over, and if you've given your best, it's one of the most satisfying feelings. And it really feels though that's what the philosophy gives everybody and what it was for me.
More than that, 1v1, it's a metaphor for life. Like when you're in your toughest moments, you're by yourself. It's you. And you're in that corner. And like, I've been through some tough moments since I've stopped playing soccer. And knowing that I can handle anything by myself has helped me get through that. And one-on-ones definitely prepared me for that.
After a number of years of developing great dribblers and goal scorers, one of the criticisms that we found was constantly leveled against our club and against our players were that we were too individualistic and we weren't going anywhere with those skills. Because my players had been focused for 3 or 4 years on tremendous deceptive dribbling skills, but too often had their heads down, weren't transitioning those skills under pressure into the game environment. And so that was when, fortuitously, we took a team to England on tour, my 79-80 team, and we're in the Manchester United Football Festival. And Manchester United had invited the Ghanaian national teams over, their under-19 team and their under-17 team, and Manu had invited them over to play against. What we found out was that it was the class of 1992. And the Ghanaians whipped them within an inch of their life. And the Ghanaians were 2 years younger. But after the game, I went to the Ghanaian coaches because I'd been so impressed with the way in which they played, because they were brilliant on the ball, but their perception of the open player and what was possible with a pass and how to penetrate under pressure in a crowd was just something to behold. So the next day I went to the practice that they were holding because the coaches had invited me to join. And as I walked up to the practice a few minutes late, I had this incredibly uncomfortable feeling because I'd never seen anything quite like it, because they had 2 squads. They had their under-19s and 17s all playing 2 versus 2 in a penalty area, and they were going side to side in the penalty area to cone goals on the sidelines of the penalty area. And it was like Grand Central Station in rush hour. And this was just unbelievably crazy. And in my initial estimation, very, very stupid. And I sat down because I kind of forced myself out of my comfort zone to sit and examine this very new way of training players. And as I watched, I started to see things of unbelievable complexity. And the things that they were doing were just exceptional, though, because aside from fakes and moves and beating players in the one-on-one and getting out of spaces and situations that were so complicated you couldn't believe that they wriggled out of them, they were also playing wall passes and overlaps and double passes and doing takeover plays and all these wonderful things under pressure in a crowd. And it was one of those, epiphanies, those wake-up calls that I'd never really challenged my players to both use their skills under pressure in a crowd, but also look for combination plays and look for people that they were playing with under pressure in a crowd. So immediately the session ended, I virtually ran down to talk to the coaches, and the English idiot here went up to the coaches and said, hey, can you tell me what drills you did to get these players to be this awesome under pressure in a crowd? And the coaches looked at me and they said, we did this. And I said, no, you're not understanding me. And about 4 different ways I asked the same question until I realized that I was being really stupid. And this was the core of what they did every session. And these talented players had grown up using these fakes and moves because it was part of their culture. In all 4 corners of Ghana, all the big cities, all the small villages and towns, they'd grown up doing this fantastically skillful, creative, job. And that was what was beautiful about this, is I saw in my mind's eye a vision that no team would then be able to defend against my Legends players by parking the bus and just crowding the penalty area. And since then, many teams have tried, and at one point or another during the game, we've always been able to break down those mass defenses with big, fast, strong athletes because we have that little bit extra skill, perception, speed of play, and finishing ability under pressure.
But 2v2s opened up this entirely new perspective to the game. We as players had conditions that meant we had to play 1 touch or 2 touch or a fake and move within 2. So we had 2 touches to do a fake, to take a shot, or make a pass. And so our speed of play had to be high, but I couldn't just take players on and dribble. Instead, I had to combine with my teammate and do wall passes or overlaps or different combination plays. But at the same time, assessing everybody else that was around us and determining whether they were going to get in the way of the path of the play that I'd planned that we were going to carry out. And that challenge improved my speed of play in a really fast way, and it made getting out to the 11v11 field so much easier because there was never that many things to figure out in the 11v11 game. There was only one ball, and so the game was easier, and we got really tight spaces around the box. I knew that me and my teammates, we could combine and create space and score goals, and so that was something that me personally, but I think my team as a whole, had a ton of confidence in our play as a result of the thousands of 2v2 rounds that we played.
We've created an environment here in Kansas City that emulates the street soccer environments that the greatest players in world history grew up in.
So what really dragged my attention to Legends was this one-of-a-kind indoor facility with all these indoor fields surrounded by boards, keeping the ball in play the whole time. Really reminded me of the environment that I grew up in Brazil, where we played on the streets or in the parks everywhere all the time. The ball was never out of play. We didn't want to waste any second of our playing time.
All of the great players played street soccer in tiny spaces, in concrete jungles, where the pressures of limited time and space forced them to be incredible players.
And I think that's what develops great players. Brazil has won 5 World Cups and had the best players in history because they all grew up playing on the streets with that freedom. And that's also what the Legends Club provides, the freedom of play, being creative, taking risks, being skillful.
I always love talking to Philippe about the environment that he grew up playing soccer in Brazil, because the connection that Brazil culturally has with the game is so special. And I think probably, at least based on talking to Philippe, probably what makes Brazil such a strong powerhouse from a soccer perspective. And I think that the facility here that we've created in Kansas City does that. It's truly bringing street soccer to the suburbs. Our facility and our training sessions and the way that we run our programming is structured without structure. It's chaotic, but done in a structured way. And the repetitions that they get from box soccer or wall ball or 1v1s or 2v2s or just small-sided play is amazing. And it allows our kids to create a culture of wanting to play the game as much as they can. And I think our club has done that. But also it allows us to create this one-up mentality we have within the club where kids are always trying to do better than their teammate with the skill that they use to create space to bury in the back of the net.
The cloud coaching system that we have here, where kids can hop in any practice of similar age, it really reminds me of what I had back home, where I would play soccer for 3 hours in a row. And the kids here, because of our culture, they are able to do that. And that's what's going to develop the great players.
I never take my players outdoors to practice. Why would I when I can get hundreds and hundreds more touches and I can be training my players to play in the clutch, in the penalty area, on both the dirty side of the ball as well as the creative side of the ball. And this accelerates development many, 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 many times over anything that I can ever do in an outdoor training environment.
So when I was being trained as a coach here for the Legends, one thing that really stood out for me was the wall ball. I was shadowing a practice and I saw these kids smashing the ball against the wall, collecting it back with a good first touch, setting it up and hitting it again, sometimes with a teammate competing against each other. And that really reminded me of myself growing up as a kid. I had a garage in my house and I would spend the whole day smashing that ball against the wall, hitting all different ways and controlling, sometimes first touching it. But that repetition made me a great shooter. That was my strongest attribute as a player, was that I could hit the ball from 4 yards with a lot of power. And I scored great goals in my college career by doing that. It was all because of that repetition. But having these kids do it here with a coach, providing them information and correcting their technique, that's what's gonna make their development go off the charts.
We choose to be inside because we get massive extra speed of development throughout the whole year that we can easily transfer to in and around the penalty area in the outdoor game, which is where games are won and lost.
So seeing this facility that Andy has built now makes me a little jealous because I practice in a concrete barn. So imagine, if you will, what kind of player I could be if I practiced in this facility.
There's no limit for what these kids can achieve by playing a facility like that.
Anders Ericsson, in his fantastic book, Peak, which is about optimizing performance in all different areas of life, talks about the 10,000 hour rule. The hypothesis is it takes 10,000 hours of deep practice in order to become a fantastic athlete or a specialist at anything, whether it's chess or any other discipline. What I did is I looked at how do we take that 10,000 hour rule and then structure the environment to reduce 10,000 hours, perhaps even to 500, in order to get the same amount of development in 1 hour as opposed to 20 hours. And what we've created here, for example, as one of the very unique components of our indoor training facility is we've got 56 box soccer courts. And in these box soccer courts, our club record is 1,474 shots in 1 hour. That's 10 4-minute rounds, a 2-minute break between each round because the rounds are exhausting. And our boxes make this possible because they're only 20 feet by 12 feet. And that feeds the ball back to the shooter or close enough to the shooter so that if they've got rocket fast reactions, they can get to their previous shot quickly as it rebounds off of the front wall and hit it again and again and again. So in 4 minutes of doing this, they can hit over 100 shots. But then if we look at transfer of training dictates that if we're working on the harder skill, shooting, then every other skill that's a little bit easier than that harder skill of shooting, every other release skill is going to be developed while you're developing shooting. So if we can build that shooting skill, the transfer of training into passing is absolutely maximal because it's a much easier skill, usually with more time and space than we have inside the penalty area. And they develop this fantastic ability to be a fox in the box so that the penalty area outdoors is easy compared to what we do in practice here and the speed and the pressure that they're under in this environment. And environment is the key. Environment is more important than coaching. Environment is more important than just about anything because it's the environment that structures the response.
Our mission at Legends Soccer Club is to give kids a platform to become more brave, more creative, and develop leadership skills as a result. We want our kids to be willing to take any risk and take on any problem or challenge that comes in front of them. Be creative enough to think through the different possible solutions that might work and choose the one that they think can be most successful, and then have the leadership mentality that puts them in a scenario where there's nothing too difficult for them and there's nothing that they don't have enough self-confidence that they can't do.
The value of the Legends philosophy has got very little to do ultimately with soccer. It conditions each and every individual that goes through it to take massive but safe risks within the sport of soccer to expand their willingness to accept greater risk in life and be brave, creative leaders in the long run.
You know, as I take what I know now and where I am, the whole brave creative leaders for life concept, without a doubt, I can tell you that being put in situations week in and week out where you know you're going to fail, but the sun's going to come up tomorrow. You know that you're going to mess up, and that's okay. And that's what life is. Life is full of mistakes and learning from them and getting better at it. And I've been able to take that into my career that I have now. I was our youngest sales manager in our company's history. I've been able to get many different accolades and step into different leadership organization roles and not be afraid of the failure that's associated with it, because with failure comes success. But you only know what that is if you've lived and breathed a culture like the Legends. And because of that, I owe a lot of who I am and what I have today.
Definitely at the Legends, I mean, Andrew Clifton was always yelling next thing, and I was always encouraged to take people on. And I did have very high self-confidence, and I did think I was the best player on the field every time I stepped on the field. So, and it was because of all those practices of wading through the crowd of players doing 1v1s and 2v2s that I was able to do that.
Yeah, I grew up a pretty introverted kid and wasn't a big fan of making mistakes. And, you know, one of the things that Andy helped me see pretty early on was that, you know, failure was okay, and that, you know, the true leaders were going to be the innovators, those that embraced risk and you know, eventually could take intelligent risks. And that was something that it took me a long time, you know, to really embrace. But having somebody like Andy that constantly pushed it for 11, 12, 13 years, I think has made me, you know, a better leader and you know, more productive in my life outside of soccer.
You know, I think also the brave creative leadership mantra plays, like I mentioned to you, plays out in the professional setting as well. And there's a specific example in my career where I'm currently a leader of a team, and I have several people that work for me. And I've made decisions before that in my mind I knew had to be brave, had to be different. It was against the mold. It was against what I think a common individual would think to do. And I've even had people around me say, hey, I think it's the wrong choice. I think this is not the path we should be going down. I felt very passionate about it, and I've done it. And when people think you should go left, you end up going right. And again, in some cases that has worked. In other cases, it's fallen flat. But at the end of the day, I went against the grain. I felt confident with it. And what was exciting about it is when people saw my passion as to why I made that decision, they see that energy around that, they start to buy in. They start to see the passion. They start to see the vision of, hey, you know what? Maybe there is something different and unique here. I can directly correlate that back and tie that back to what I was taught as a youth player, playing soccer in the backyard or playing soccer with the legends. That type of mentality is what carries over. And you will continually push against the grain. We encourage people to do that. How else are you supposed to be innovative and disruptive? This is the space we need to do it in. And life provides that opportunity. And so I think I would encourage anyone to go out there and try to do that. It will always be a little different, but you'll never look back and regret it.
Growing up in the Legends Club and growing up as a kid playing with this philosophy has truly made me a legend for life.